There's a lot of things going on with the router inside of Angular 2 right now. And so far, it's decent. It's definitely getting there. It's not as full featured as most router implementations on different other frameworks, but it's getting there. So some of the components, as far as like what the router provides, it pretty much provides three different types of things. We have directives that we use for the routing to make dynamic links. We have services that we use inside of our components to do like routing inside of our components. And then we have decorators to configure our routing. So those are like the three parts of the router. So like I said, the three things: the router providers, the route directives, and then the route config decorator. So before we get started with routing, if you're not familiar with client-side routing, then the way it works is it uses HTML5 push state, which is like pretty much just like a stack in your browser of what the current state is and what to do for the layout for that state, like what's part of that state. So it's using that, which means we have to use the base href. And this is because Angular 2 doesn't support legacy browsers anymore, which fall back to the hashtag implementation URL. So we don't do that anymore because Angular 2 doesn't support legacy browsers. So it's like, we're only going to do push state. Whereas like Angular 1 gave you the option, you could put HTML5 mode or not. No, it's always going to be HTML5 mode, at least for now with this router, because I don't think they plan on supporting any legacy browsers, only evergreen browsers. So because of that, you have to do two things. One, on your server side, you need to make sure that you're catching this, because your client-side routes are going to look exactly like your server routes. So that way your server is going to be trying to do something and it's not geared to serve static assets because you had it set up for legacy browsers. You need to make sure you're redirecting back to the index.html page on any other routes that anybody hits on your server. And also the base href, which by default I think does this, but you need to set it anyway to resolve the relative URLs for the routing and also static assets. So definitely do that in the head of your HTML. So setting up the configuration is pretty much handled by the decorator function. You'll see it's pretty simple. And then the router outlet, that's like the equivalent of like ngView with a UI router and UI view, or ngView with the Angular router and UI view with the UI router. It's pretty much the equivalent, with some small differences that we'll discover really soon. But it's supposed to do the same thing conceptually. So here's a little example of using the route config decorator that we use to decorate our component with our routing. So it would make sense to start at the highest level component possible to set up your routing. At least for now, that's the pattern that we're going to be using. And then as we get into child routing, you'll set up that routing there for that top level component. So it's pretty simple. Route config takes an array of objects with a path, a name, a component, and then an optional use default. So the path is actually the URL. Yes?
I might be getting ahead of us, but is there, do we have like the route resolve functionality we had in Angular 1, where we could resolve a promise before the route?
So they moved that over to lifecycle hooks on the router.
Oh, okay.
So you, just like you have lifecycle hooks on the component on init, you can actually use lifecycle hooks provided by the router to decorate your component to say can activate. And then can activate takes the next component and the previous component, and it can handle any asynchronous operation. And if you return true, it'll go. If you return false, it won't. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, path, name, component. So the way this works, the path is obviously the URL here. We'll get more than that. The name is just a unique name for your route. And we're using named routes here, so we don't have to remember the paths when we navigate to them. We can just refer to the names. So the name should be unique. And then the component obviously is the component you want to load up when that route is hit. And then the optional use as default is what's going to be the default route for this top level component. So if we just render the page, it's just going to be what component am I going to show when I initially go here. So it's it's the index component. And again, to instruct the router where to place the component in the parent component that it's being rendered in, you need to use the router outlet. So one small nuance about this that we found out, maybe it's not a nuance, it's in the docs, so I guess it's not a nuance, but it's different than ngView and UI view, whereas those router implementations will drop your component and your template inside this router outlet directive as a child. Angular 2's router will drop it underneath it as a sibling. So that might not seem like a big difference, but it's actually kind of hard to style the component that's being rendered if you can't access it. So it's kind of tough there. We ran into that.
30 minutes of our life gone, never to get back once we realized what was
You
happening.
wasted more than that on a burrito. Come on.
All right. So navigating the route. There's a couple different ways we can do it. There's probably going to be one or two ways you're going to be doing it. One is going to be the templates using the routerLink directive here. So the routerLink directive is provided for us through the route providers and the route directives, and it pretty much just like adds functionality to your anchor tags that are aware of a route name. So the way it works is you just pass in an array, and that array has the name of the route that you want to navigate to. Yes?
Back when you were talking about the route config, if you don't say which one is the default, does it just assume that the first one on the list
No.
is the default?
No, it won't load anything.
Oh.
Throw it in.
Yeah, it'll just be like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. So your routerLink is a directive. You can decorate anchor tags and other things, and then pass in the name of the component that you want to navigate to as an array. Why it's an array? Implementation detail, not sure. So to navigate through your component through JavaScript, you can inject the router service. And that router service has a method on it called navigate, which also takes the name of the component that you want to navigate to. And you can navigate that way. So after a promise, after this, after that, boom, navigate. Any questions on this stuff? Pretty simple, right? So here's an example of the directives, the routerLink directives. So here, actually, would that even work with the backslash in front of it, like the forward slash in front of it? I guess that does work. But you don't have to put the forward slash in front of it. You just need to put the name of the component. So this is right here where it says routerLink, and then its value set to home about and experiment. You don't need the forward slash there. It's just the name of the component, and it's just it'll work. This is not the path that you want to navigate to. It's the name of the component you want to navigate to, which was declared here. So wherever you put name, that's the name that you put there. So you don't need the forward slash. And that's routerLink. And then to use the router service, you inject it into the component that you want to use, and then again, you just call it navigate, and you pass in the same argument you would have passed into routerLink. An array with a string of the route that you want to navigate to. Here. Yes.
That you've got the full.
That would be, you wouldn't need that actually, really, would you, if you had that used as default?
Well, this is for more. Well, this is a trivial example. This would be for more like you have like dynamic routes.
Yeah.
Like when we get to parameters and stuff.
Yeah,
it'll
but
be
I'm just
different.
saying, like for the app,
Right.
sort of.
Yes, exactly. You wouldn't need it. Again, you don't need the forward slash here either. You can just put the name of the component.
I think it is navigate by URL with another method as well.
Yeah, navigate by URL would be the one if you know the exact URL. So query parameters and parameters. Obviously, we need these. It wouldn't be a really good routing implementation if we didn't have this. No deep linking. So again, just like any other parameter type on any type of routing system, it's optional parameters that we can add using the same syntax you would use on any other routing platform. The way you get access to it, though, is going to be with the route. Oh, actually, I think that's on the next slide. So we'll get there. So in the routerLink, when you navigate, the reason that it's an array there is because you can pass in a second argument, which is the parameters you want to attach to that navigation. So for instance, right here, we define a path for I think it's supposed to be a semicolon there, but for users, and it should have an ID on it. This one doesn't have an ID on it, but it should have an ID on it. And then on the routerLink, we're just saying, hey, we want to navigate to the user's component with the ID of 7, which would attach it to the URL, which we could then grab once that component is mounted and do whatever we want with it. Grab the current user with that ID. And we would do that using the route param service. So again, routerLink, navigating to your component, optional parameters object there that's going to attach to the URL path that you set up in your route config. So we're passing in this object that says ID1. That means in this component's parent, where the route config is set up, in that path, we have a parameter that says ID, so it can match up with it. That object's properties must match up with the parameters that we define on the path of this route. If that sounds confusing, you'll see it in the example. And then again, how you get access to those parameters, using the route param service from Angular 2, inject that into our component, and now we have route params, which has a method called get, which takes a key of the parameter that you want to access and then just returns it.